Welcome. My name is Fiona O'Reilly, and I'm the Director of Global Strategy for Divine Renovation Ministry. We're a ministry that's focused on inspiring and equipping Catholic parishes to help them become missional. And recently, the Vatican Congregation for Clergy brought out a pastoral instruction for parishes, which looks at the whole area of pastoral conversion and calls parishes into that conversion for the sake of mission, for the sake of evangelization. We wanted to take some time just to explore all that the document offers, to unpack some of the vision it sets out, to understand some of the guardrails that it sketches out in canon law that we can work within, to look at some of the areas where it's silent, and to think about how do we apply this and share some of what we've learned, some of the wins, some of the struggles from our experience in the last 4 years of helping parishes move from maintenance to mission. For this conversation, I'm going to be joined by Father James Mallon. Welcome, Father James.
It's great to be with you, Fiona.
Now, for our viewers who don't know you, it's probably worth my just sketching out a little bit of your background. So you were parish priest originally of St. Benedict Parish here in Halifax, Nova Scotia. And you started a whole journey with that parish of moving from maintenance to mission. You know, how could we have a parish focused on the primacy of evangelization and living out its call to share the good news in the power of the Holy Spirit and serve with the best of leadership principles, all grounded in the Eucharist. I know that through that, we discovered so much about how to get it wrong and how to get it right.
That's right.
And we put those insights into the first Divine Renovation book. And after that, you have then spent the last 3 years working in the Diocese of Halifax, Yarmouth. Just say a little bit more about what you've been doing in the last 3 years and what you're going on to next.
What I've been working on at the diocesan level and in many ways within Divine Renovation, because I've been 50-50 with my time, is basically the stuff this document is about. That's what makes me so excited about it. And it's so relevant for our particular situation as dioceses all over the world grapple with this call to missionary renewal and also what it means in terms of dealing with an outdated structure. And so these guidelines it's very, very well timed today, at least for our context and for many other dioceses throughout the world.
Great. And I understand that as well as retaining your role on the priest council, you're now back in parish ministry.
That's right. I am now pastor of Our Lady of Guadalupe Parish, and I'd felt that stirring really for the last year, a sense of how the COVID-19 pandemic has really changed the game. And I found myself thinking, have I become just a theoretician with opinions? And because the situation has changed a lot, and I just felt called to get off the bench and to get back onto the field again, because this is an evolving reality and there's all kinds of new learnings to be had there. And one of our values at Divine Renovation Ministries from the trenches that we believe in learning on the ground in real time. So I'm thrilled to be back in pastoral ministry, still involved in Divine Renovation, of course, and serving in an advisory capacity at the diocesan level.
Great, thank you. And it's so helpful as we explore the contents of this document to be able to have both sides of the coin, that diocesan perspective, which many of the ordinaries and diocesan or chancery staff will be looking at this document will have, and also the perspective of pastors and their teams as they look at this document. And I don't want to assume that everyone who's watching us will have already had a chance to read the document. So maybe let's just start off by unpacking, you know, what type of document is this that we've received?
Yeah, it's a bit of a hybrid document, because it's got two very distinct parts. Anyone who reads it will very quickly realize that the first 6 sections are very visionary. They're drawing on a rich tradition from Lumen Gentium through Evangelii Nuntiandi of Pope Paul VI, and especially Evangelii Gaudium of Pope Francis. And there's also, this document is, you know, when people say the Vatican released or the Vatican said, and often in media, that could mean anything. It could mean like the Vatican cat said something, or, you know, the Pope made an ex cathedra pronouncement, which he hasn't for a very, very long time. So what does this mean, the Vatican? Because the Vatican is a complex organization, an organism. This is from the Congregation of Clergy, which is a particular office within the Vatican that deals with the rights and responsibilities, obligations and duties of the clergy, so bishops, priests, and deacons. but also is very much in recent years dealing with the realities on the ground in dioceses, mostly in North America, Western Europe, where the reality of restructuring and even the painful question of closing church buildings is dealt with. So if there are any kerfuffles at the diocesan level on those issues, it goes to the guys who wrote this document. So they've got a fairly good sense of what's happening. And the undersecretary for the congregation, Monsignor Andrea Ripa, the undersecretary in these congregations is usually the person who does a lot of the work. You know, the head of the congregation is a sometimes kind of like a figurehead, and then the secretary does a lot of the big picture stuff. But the undersecretary really is like the real driver of the thing. And he gave this fantastic reflection on the document, where he basically said that this is a theological, pastoral, and canonical resource. Right there, he sums it up. There's a great theological section up front that draws from all of these past documents, including past documents from the Congregation of the Clergy that were released during the pontificate of John Paul II and Pope Benedict, 1997 and 2002, I believe, which would therefore be both under Pope John Paul II. And it has to do with the concept of, or the question of parish renewal and specifically the ministry of the priest. So anyone who wants to check out those documents, you can go to the Vatican website and put that in. So a theological, pastoral, and canonical resource, great theological session dealing with pastoral questions. And then the second part, getting into fairly specific canonical issues, which are very important. We're going to talk about that a bit later. But it does create within the document a sense of two very distinct parts.
Yeah, and I was really struck how the document itself both contains a strong and urgent call for parishes to put evangelization at the core of what they do, and then beautifully situates the canon law as, if you like, the guardrails or the kind of lines on the pitch that we can work within. And of course, as with anything, kind of having those parameters helps us operate much more effectively. So it was just so interesting to see the Congregation for Clergy really setting out both sides of the story, the kind of vision, the possibilities, and then also some of the things to think about, the riverbed of the river, if you will, the canon law.
Well, you've used the metaphor. You said the lines on the pitch. Now you're from Ireland, I'm from Scotland, and a pitch for us means a soccer field. This is true. But think about it, to play soccer, you need to have lines. I mean, when I was a kid, we played a lot of soccer on parks and parking lots, and no lines, no goalposts. And it took some creative imagination to really be free to play the game. Whenever we played on a pitch with lines and markings, it enabled us to play in a much more full way than before. So lines are necessary, but you don't play soccer by simply running around the lines. Yeah. So there are necessary starting point, and the document presents both. It gives these lines, but it also gives the end game. It speaks beautifully and powerfully about the missionary calling of parishes. We're going to talk about that in a later video. We're going to try to restrain ourselves at this point. But I think, in initial reading, some people might say, well, this feels very schizophrenic. Mm-hmm. This is obviously written by two different people. It's like, yeah, or at least two different teams of people, but both are necessary. Mm-hmm. They're presenting beautifully the end game. What's the end game? What is it we're aiming for? What are the basic lines around the starting point? Because one of the other challenges in a document like this is you're dealing with a document that's going out to the global Catholic Church in multiple contexts with very different issues, and you can do a bit of an exegesis on this document and say, what was the intention of the authors? What were they trying? What was the real life situation they were speaking into? And perhaps in some, I think for all churches, this need to be reminded of the missionary calling, our missionary identity, the primacy of evangelization, how, as the Evangelii Gaudium says, all of these structures are to serve the missionary option. Mm-hmm. And the fact that that's sometimes a struggle to achieve. And I think that's universal throughout the church. But then in some places, these guidelines, these canonical guidelines, because perhaps as we step into unfamiliar territory, we're always kind of innovating a little bit. And when you do that, there's always risk. And you might overstep one of those lines, and there's a need perhaps to be reminded of what's negotiable and what's non-negotiable. And I think there are particular churches in particular parts in the world where maybe that's more of an issue than in others.
Thank you. And I know one of the other things I was struck by when I read the document, that there's so much in there about the role of the parish. But of course that can mean so many things to different people. So, just say a little bit more about, the term parish, and how does this document suggest that we think about a parish?
It's one of those perennial problems. You use a word which has multiple meanings for different people, and we talk past one another. We certainly discovered that in our own journey in restructuring it here at the Archdiocese of Halifax-Yarmouth. And we had to constantly remind people that, that the word parish will mean different things for different people. And typically we think parish, we think of that building on the corner. It's a parish equals one building with one area and one parish priest. And that's my parish and everything that's about that. And yet, canon law itself defines a parish as a portion of the people of God. And so a parish is primarily not a building. It's a community of people, a community, in fact, that may be even a community of communities, because every parish in different ways is if you think about a typical parish that has 3-4 masses, weekend masses, these are often 3 or 4 very distinct worshiping communities. 80% of the people who go to one mass never venture into another mass time. So parishes are communities of communities in different ways. But today, as we grapple with the changing realities and, inheriting an infrastructure from the past that is in many ways not serving us anymore, you can have a parish that is multiple buildings, multiple locations, even in multiple places. And so, as Evangelii Gaudium reminded us, the parish has great flexibility. And ultimately, a parish, in what we're dealing with here, is really about a portion of the people of God that may have multiple buildings, places, but led by one pastor who may have other priests and lay ministers serving with him. In communion with the bishop, of course.
Absolutely. And I love the way that the document in section 123, it really talks about parishes being on a voyage of discovery or rediscovery about their identity. And I think this document is aiming to serve that. And it speaks really compellingly about the parish as a fundamental place of evangelical proclamation. It talks about it being the place where the Eucharist is celebrated, and it is a place of fraternity, that recovery of the idea of fellowship, of community, not just structures and buildings as being core to a parish's identity. And it's the place, of charity from which Christian witness shines forth. So this is never about a parish serving itself with an inward posture. There's always a shining forth. There's always a proclamation of the gospel. There's always a fellowship that invites in and goes out to encounter, all at the service of making Christ known, loved, and served. And so I love that invitation to rediscovery that this document offers as well. The other thing that I know when we were talking just before we started filming, we were both so struck by God's timing on this document. Say a bit more about that.
Yeah, we in this interview that Monsignor Ripa did, reflecting on the document, they said they've been working on this for a number of years. And they've been working on it because questions have been raised. The struggling with what it means for missionary and pastoral conversion, and what that means for our structures. And there's been a lot of paperwork piling up at this congregation. We should pray for these guys, because I'm sure their decks are piled with paper. I've seen some of the paperwork that's gone there just from my own diocese alone, and I can't imagine. So as these questions arise, they needed to respond to them. And yet the very kind of shift in culture and decline that's been happening for years now has really been accelerated recently through the COVID-19 pandemic. And much more quickly, these questions are going to have to be grappled with. So the timing in this sense is really, really great. Also for us as a ministry, I have to say, as a Divine Renovation ministry, and we just released another book that I wrote and called Divine Renovation Beyond the Parish, which deals exactly with the question, with the fact that you can't separate the question of parish renewal from diocesan renewal. We're Catholics. The local church is not the parish. The local church is the diocese. And so the kind of, if we want to see long-term fruitfulness, the diocese has to be involved in this. So, well, a couple of things also that I liked about what Monsignor Ripa said in this interview is that he made the point that this is about maintaining unity in the church in a diversity of contexts, which means it's not about uniformity. That was a brilliant point. He said, there is, even in the canonical section, a great sense of freedom in this, that we're not imposing uniformity, we're giving basic guidelines. And there was a very telling section in his interview where he said, he basically pointed to two extremes, and this is echoed in the document itself, which we'll get to, is in terms of collaboration. And the one extreme, he says, you've got priests who basically make all the decisions themselves and just tell people what to do and reduce the lay faithful to executors of the will of the priest. That's an extreme. It's like, wow, they're actually naming that as an extreme. The other extreme is basically where a parish in which the pastor, say on a pastoral council, or is just one other member. It's like leadership by committee, which we always say at Divine Renovation is deadly, to like avoid that. And so they're saying that's another extreme, is the blurring of the uniqueness of the role of the pastor. And I think those are two very real extremes that are out there. And they're saying that we really should be aiming for somewhere in the middle. And that in many ways really, if you wanted a key purpose for this document, what it's about that. It's about, there's a place for everyone. There's a role for everyone. Everyone is called to participate in this great mission of parish renewal, but there are distinctive roles distinct to the baptized and to the ordained.
Thank you. And let's have a look at some of those other sections. We're going to go through a couple of different segments of this conversation, exploring the kind of first 6 sections and the vision, exploring the second half and some of the possibilities and some of the guardrails that canon law gives us, unpacking some of the areas where the document is silent or there are some tensions. And then lastly, really just looking at, what do we know in Divine Renovation, having spent the last 4 years journeying with parishes around the world who are trying to make this shift to putting evangelization and mission first? And so what are some of the reflections that might help as pastors, as bishops seek to take this instruction and really put it into action?